As per usual, James and Allan are going to talk about some movies they watched. However, at some point they mention El Topo and Barbie in the same sentence. I'm just going to push play because I have to know how that goes down. Welcome to the Cinema Shame podcast, sponsored by DVD Netflix.
Welcome to the Cinema Shame podcast. My name is James Patrick. Along with me today is my co-host, Allan Mott.
Hello.
He's over there. This is another...
All the way in Canada.
There's too many Canadians in my life.
There's not enough Canadians in your life. I think you have the opposite problem.
I think the per capita Canadian in my life is rather high.
But I would say that's a good thing.
Okay. This is another edition of the Cinema Shelfie series where we pluck random titles. They're not so random, actually, in that we at one point decided we were fit to own them. And we roll the dice and see which ones shake off our shelves. I'm a big fan of these episodes just because it gives me a reason to bend down to the J shelf and see what's down there that I haven't seen. It literally is on the bottom, so you're up above. You don't always look down in the bottom shelf. Your eyes gravitate towards those top three, and those are well viewed. The J's and K's on that bottom there, they're not so viewed.
We still have to discuss because it hasn't come up yet, but what the penalty will be if we have because I was looking if I had gotten what you had gotten for this round, a Blu-ray J, I would not have been able to do it. I have seen all of my J Blu-rays, so I would not have been able to complete this task. I
actually had 4 unwatched J Blu-rays. It was a bounty of J Blu-rays. I think maybe the penalty is you have to go to the other person. It's like, what's on your shelf that I haven't seen? That could be interesting.
That could be, yeah.
I went last time when I talked about the almost totally watchable Train Ride to Hollywood. So this time, it's Allan's turn to kick it off with his Q pick, Quicksand.
My digital Q pick.
A digital Q pick. We can't get you off those digitals. Maybe next time.
And in this case, it's a recording that I made off of TCM. I have a lot of those. I actually feel sad because my cable company recently reached out to me and said, hey, your DVR player is 15 years old and we're no longer going to support it. And I had 200 movies on it from TCM that I recorded on my DVR, but I haven't actually recorded onto my computer yet. So I had to basically just give up on all of those movies, so I'm feeling bereft. But I'm starting anew. I think I already have 20 on my new PVR of recordings from TCM. So
wait, you had to surrender?
Yeah.
The old DVR with?
Yeah. Well, I didn't have to surrender it. They basically just said after September, it's not going to work anymore. Yeah.
And were you able to salvage the things you recorded on there, or did
the issue is that the only way I have to get them onto my computer is it's basically the same as recording it with a VHS player. So I have to do it in real time. So it would be 200 movies done at 90 minutes apiece in basically the amount of time I had before. So it was sort of I just don't have the time to do that.
Do you have something better to do? I did that with my entire VHS collection a few years ago, and I would I'd sit down and watch a movie, it was many movies because there's a lot of stuff to go through. So you're sitting there with the Elgato video recorder and pumping them in there in real time. Yeah, that is a chore.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I have. Is the Elgato. So that's.
I don't think there's another option. I think that's all we've got.
Yeah, and so this is one of the ones I managed to get onto my hard drive before then, And Quicksand, it's a 1950 film starring Mickey Rooney. It was directed by Irving Pitchell, who I don't know a lot about, but just looking at his IMDb page, seems like a really interesting dude because he was both an actor and director. He's got 70 actor credits and 40 directing credits.
In some high-profile movies, I might add.
Yeah. No, he's probably best known for directing Mr. Peabody and the Mermaid and Destination Moon. At least looking over his filmography, those were the two titles that immediately jumped out at me as like, oh, hey, I know those movies.
He's co-director on The Most Dangerous Game as well.
Yeah. And Quicksand is very much a very low-budget B movie. This is clearly made like in the post-MGM era where Mickey Rooney was no longer the biggest star in the world and was now just sort of slumming it in the B's. And it's... I don't want to say it's a bad movie, but it's like interesting movie. Like I wrote up like this like plot synopsis of it just before this, and I actually watched the movie probably a month and a half ago. So the fact that I can remember so much of the plot after that amount of time is probably to the film's benefit to its praise. But at the same time, I think one of the reasons why I remember what happens in it so much is because it chickens out on the landing so spectacularly that it becomes easy to remember things because it's sort of like you remember how much they fucked up. That it's like, well, they were doing this and this and this and this, and they should have ended up here, but they went here instead, and it just completely derailed everything. And so I think that's one reason why I remember it as well as I do. I wrote here that it aims for noir, but it feels a lot closer to a half-hearted ABC after-school special. But the difference is that ABC after-school specials could be really brutal, and this didn't go to that level of brutality. In it, Rooney plays Dan, a mechanic who manages to score a hot date with a blonde waitress named Helen, who's played by All About Eve's Barbara Bates, before he realizes he's too broke to give her the good time he thinks will impress her. And he tries to get the cash he needs by asking a friend who owes him $20, but the friend can't get it to him in time. So he decides to take the $20 out of the till at work, knowing he has enough time to put it back before the shop's accountant notices it's missing. And then Dan takes Helen on their hot date, and on the way they run into a sleazy arcade owner named Nick, who's played by Peter Lorre, who's probably the best thing in the movie.
And his name deserves mention in this movie.
Yeah.
Because it's Nick Dramoshag.
Yeah.
It's like they just randomly assembled syllables and smashed them together to find some sort of word.
Vaguely ethnic, like sort of
a name.
The next day, Danny comes in back to work, and he's shocked because the accountant is there checking the books because the boss wanted him to come in early. And he realizes that he has to raise the $20 really quickly to make up the difference in the till. So he tries to get a payday loan, but he gets rejected. And so he instead raises the cash by buying a $100 watch on the installment plan and then immediately going to a pawn shop and getting $30 for it or something. Like, I mean, it's a lot less than what he owes. And when he comes back to the shop, the accountant tells him that the money is missing from the till, and Dan is like very casual and goes like, "Oh, let me check." And then he reaches into the back of the till. "Oh, here's a $20 bill that you must have missed." And so he thinks like, "Okay, I've got it away with it. Now all I have to worry about is paying $10 a month for this watch for the next year or so." But that turns out to be just the beginning of his troubles, because he's soon visited by a cop who tells him that the jewelry store has a deal with that pawn shop. So the pawn shop tells them whenever they get anything like that in there, and there's a clause in his installment contract that determines the watch is their property until it's fully paid for. And if he tries to sell it before then, they have the right to demand immediate payment in full with interest. So now Dan goes from owing $20 to owing $100 plus interest to the jewelry store, and he has to figure out a way to to get cash, but the problem is he's already exhausted all of his other solutions before, so now he's sitting in a bar in the pier, desperate, like not sure what he's going to do. And then in the bar there's this really drunk, obnoxious guy who turns out to be the guy who operates the bingo parlor on the pier, and when he has to pay his tab, he takes out this big wad of bills, and Dan decides that he's going to do what he has to do, and he ends up mugging the man.
Feels like 1950s Uncut Gems.
Yeah, pretty much. It's very much like that. And then after he mugs the man, he reunites with Helen for their second date, and they once again run into Nick Dramoshag, who notes that Dan seems pretty agitated for someone who's on a date. And then Dan pays off the money he owes for the watch, but his troubles aren't over because Nick has figured out that he was the one who mugged the old man. And he tells Dan he won't go to the cops if Dan gets him a new car. And with no other choice, Dan steals the new car from the shop. But once again, it only escalates his descent into crime because his boss pulls him into his office and tells him he knows Dan stole the car and demands he pays up $3,000 or else he's going to the cops. And so Dan confesses the situation to Helen, and she tells him that Nick has at least $4,000 hidden in one of the arcade machines he has stored away, and all Dan has to do is break in and take it, well, which he does. But he's fucked over once again because Ellen immediately spends $2,000 of that money on the fur coat she told him he wanted on their first date. And now he doesn't have enough money to pay off his boss. And so when he goes to the boss and tells him, this is all I got, his boss is like, that's not enough, I'm going to call the cops. And Dan panics and strangles him until he stops moving. And then he bolts out of the shop. And then he runs into his coworker on the street who tells him that he just quit because the day before his boss took him into the office and told him that he knew he was the one who stole the car and wanted $3,000. So it turns out his boss was only bluffing the whole time and had no idea who had actually stolen the car. And so he may have just murdered the man for nothing. And then he runs back into Helen, who wants nothing to do with him, and but he does have. It turns out he has this admirer named Vera, who's played by James Cagney's sister Jean, and she's really sweet, and she loves him for reasons that make no sense given what we've actually seen of Dan in the movie. It's one of those ones where we just have to buy that he has special qualities that only she can see. And she agrees to help him to go on the lam, and so he figures what he'll do is he'll go on the fishing trip that the friend of his at the beginning of the movie who owed him the $20 was going on, and that way while on the trip he can go on and escape from the law. But they need a way to get to the pier. So what they do is they carjack a vehicle that turns out to be driven by a lawyer who after learning everything Dan has done, informs him he's looking at the death penalty if his boss is dead, but if he'll only have to serve about 11 years if his boss is alive. And he also very unconvincingly asserts that Vera so far isn't guilty of any crime, which is blatantly untrue. Like she's literally participated in a kidnapping and a carjacking, but the movie wants to like go like, oh, Vera's on the verge of like potentially becoming a criminal too, but she hasn't yet, even though she very much has become a criminal for this doofus loser who doesn't deserve to become a criminal for. And the three of them get to the pier. But Dan is spotted by the cops and doesn't get to the boat in time. He tries to hide, but is cornered, and we hear shots fired. And this is the moment where, the movie, like, it's not great, but it's entertaining. It's only 75 minutes, so it's moving really fast. But it completely whiffs the landing because the next thing we see is a wounded Dan being arrested while the lawyer tells him that he's learned through the cops that Dan's boss is still alive, so he's just going to have to serve time instead of going to the electric chair. And Dan admits he has it coming, and he's sorry for everything he's done before the credits roll. And like I said at the beginning, like if this actually was sort of the ABC after school special that it feels like, then he would have either gotten shot and killed by the cops or survived and gotten the death sentence. Like they were very good at showing like these are the full consequences. Like if you do PCP, you are going to jump out of a window and die. Like there's no, it was never an easy like, oh, like everything's going to turn out okay. You'll serve 11 years and Vera will be waiting for you and it'll be happy ever after all of this. And, I could see it like the filmmakers wanting to go easy on Dan if they had presented him like as a truly like likable character who, you know, just got over his head. Like I'm thinking of like Griffin Dunn in After Hours, where like you just feel really sorry for this guy each step of the way. But because like the way he's written and the way Rooney plays him, he's like a jerk. And, like, you never actually feel sympathetic or sorry for him as these things escalate. It's always just like, well, yeah, what did you think was going to happen? Like, it's just like each time it's like, yeah, no, those are the consequences of making these choices, buddy. Like, you could have just said to Helen, like, oh, I guess we can't go. I'm broke. Like, you're the one who wanted to get the hot blonde when you had this sort of cute brunette who loves you inexplicably. Like, it's really sort of like toxic masculinity. Like maybe that's why I wanted him to suffer, is because it could have been a good example of like, this is what happens when you buy into toxic masculinity and think you deserve the hot blonde, and you know you do all of these things and then you know you end up dead or on death row. Like that to me would have been a fun noir movie, but it just ends up chickening out and just giving us like this sort of like as happy an ending as they could get away with. And yeah, I would say like check it out just because it is such a quick view. It's only, like I said, it's a B-movie programmer. It was only 75 minutes, but yeah, no, that's Quicksand.
I usually like it when Mickey Rooney gets his in movies, like whether he deserves it or not. I kind of enjoy that aspect of him not being the likable leading man, because I always kind of find him off-putting at a certain point. Because he was such a jerk in real life, and I think that, especially in his later roles, that very much comes across on screen. And I do think some of those stories had seeped into while I'm watching it. I'm like, which cast member did he abuse today? Like, there's always these questions going around, like, what was he like on this set? So, he may have deserved a little bit more. I do like the tagline for this movie. Did you... A guy who yields to temptation just once, ...
Yeah. ...
And finds it's once too often.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's actually, like, in terms of, like, noir concepts go, it's a winner. Like, this idea of just, you do one like, sort of minor, trivial, bad thing, and it just leads to, like... But I think if you're going to go noir, you have to go all the way. Like, to me, I always think of, like, Detour, where, like, the guy, you know, like he strangles her with the phone cord, and then it just literally, like, 30 seconds later, you just see him, like, literally get into the police car as they drive off. Like, I think you need that sort of... You need a downbeat ending for this. It's not... You can't get away with sort of like, oh, you know, he's going to be fine after he gets out of prison. Like, you can't do that.
Well, Quicksand walked so Uncut Gems could fly.
Yeah. Yeah, this would have been better if it was directed by the Safdie brothers, I think.
Yeah. All right. Leads to the second half of our double bill. And when I bent all the way down to look at that Dusty J shelf, I came away with a little documentary that I had purchased when it came out and let sit there, despite everyone telling me that it was one of the best documentaries about filmmaking in recent memory. So I plucked Jodorowsky's Dune from my shelf and sat down and gave that a watch.
Mi ambición fue tremenda. I wanted to make something sacred, una película que diera las alucinaciones de LSD. Si tomara LSD to change the young mind of all the world. Michel Siduk said to me, I want to make a new picture with you. What do you want to do? I say, Dune. And he said, yes.
C'était le plus beau livre de science-fiction, c'est la Bible de la science-fiction, un succès d'édition mondiale.
I didn't read Dune, but I have a friend who said it was fantastic. 3,000 drawings. I shoot the picture, point of view, movement of the camera, dialogue.
Designing the spaceships, the clothes, the whole look of his world.
The castle. Open the mouth. The spaceship came in the tongue.
His vision was so huge, so beyond what anybody else was doing at that time. Things that George Lucas wasn't even going to try with Star Wars. It's enormous.
Part of Holler's genius was finding the right people.
David Carradine, Mick Jagger. Dali as the mad emperor of the galaxy.
Dali said, can I have a burning giraffe? All right, we'll have burning giraffe.
Orson Welles. Yeah, I say, I don't want to do it. I said, if you do the picture, I will hire the chef of the restaurant and you will eat as here every day. And I say, I do it. Giger nunca había hecho películas. I say to Giger, I need you as you are.
Alejandro completely motivated you. It was wonderful.
We will change the world.
People did not do this film because they were afraid of his imagination.
This is a movie that has its fingerprints all over so many other movies. Blade Runner, William Gibson, Matrix.
Giger, he make the monster of Alien. And Hollywood start to use my group.
It always leads back to Jodorowsky.
Could be fantastic, no?
You also mentioned that we watched these movies some time ago before we were able to get around to produce this recording, and I'd like to say that if you think you might not be talking about a movie for a while, watch a documentary, because the narrative doesn't matter. We can talk about whatever we want. I'm a big fan of watching the documentary because I have to pay attention to the narrative. I don't have to write anything down. I'm just like, I made notes, like things I wanted to bring up, but the minute by minute to recollection is really not that important. What I really enjoyed about Jodorowsky's Dune was that it reinforces the legend of Allan Jodorowsky as a visionary, madman, optimist, idealist, sort of a real-life Don Quixote. But even then, what's even more impressive is the guy creates movies by finding the most talented people in the world and just goes to get them. It doesn't matter who they are. This particular story involves the tale of how he wooed Salvador Dali to join his production just because he thought it would be cool.
And didn't he offer him like something like $100,000 an hour or something? Like it was like a ridiculous amount of money.
Dali, they played this game where they would meet and then Dali would come up with a reason why he had to leave or go somewhere else, and he'll be in such and such a place in 3 months and 4 days, and if you're there, we'll talk again. So this courtship transpired over many months when he finally sort of nailed him down, and so to that, Dali demanded to be the highest paid actor in all of film, and demanded something like $100,000. I don't have didn't write down the exact number, but that feels like what he asked for. It was a number that nobody could ever pay, but
especially for Dali.
Well.
I mean, if you're getting like a Marlon Brando for Superman, like that, right. That's one thing. But Salvador Dali is not going to help the box office of your movie.
By virtue of not being an actor, he was able to demand whatever he wanted because there's no precedent for Salvador Dali on screen.
Yeah.
So they came up with
I would just look, what were the Spellbound, like when was the Spellbound box office? Does that justify it?
Yeah. He came up with some sort of solution paying him by the second of screen time or something, if I remember correctly. It was far less than what Dali was actually asking for, but it sounded real nice. So he's like, I'm on board for this lunatic production. The documentary does a good job of allowing that there's a certain brilliance to the way Jodorowsky made movies. whether you agree with that brand of excellence.
And therein lies the rub, because I really enjoyed this movie when I saw it. I thought I had bought it, but it turns out I had just rented it at the time, so I wasn't able to rewatch it for this. But I remember coming away like thinking like, this is a great documentary like about filmmaking, and it explores, like, to me, one of my favorite like sort of avenues of film history, and that is the films that were planned but never actually got made. Mm-hmm. Like, to me, I like the what ifs are just always so fascinating. But one of the things you always think about when these things is like, would I have actually enjoyed the movie that got made if they had managed to make it? And I became away 100% convinced that I would have absolutely hated Jodorowsky's Dune if he had actually been able to make it. Like, I think my issue, my issue with Jodorowsky goes all the way back to my first discovering the Danny Perry cult movie books, because I read about El Topo and the Holy Mountain, and even as a kid, I just read it, and instead of going like, oh wow, that sounds really like deep and mysterious and artistic, I just read like, wow, that sounds like a lot of bullshit. And I think I am not charmed by Jodorowsky the way a lot of other people are. I just hear him talk about this as like, yeah, that seems like a really dumb way to do art. I feel like there are other directors who make really good movies who don't do all of that stuff, and they're just as good as you are. And I actually like their movies more, so I'm not going to buy into your philosophy.
Yeah. I would have definitely wanted to watch this movie. When we're talking about the launching point for his conception of Dune, it was taking where he was spiritually, emotionally. I mean, listen to him talk about it. Like, it's an ulterior plane that he's living on. So he's taking this holy mountain spirituality and transferring it into a science fiction film that, by all accounts, does have a narrative, but listening to him, he was going to make sure that that was totally obscured, and it was this visionary production that was going to transcend all filmmaking. It was going to be the movie that broke cinema. And I think we're doing this podcast because we're kind of fond of cinema.
Yeah.
So, if you really look at the way he was approaching narrative film, which not necessarily a strong suit for a Jodorowsky film, I'm right there with you in that I have to question what in the hell was actually going to happen if that was put on film.
Yeah.
It is admirable to listen to him talk about what he wants to do, because you get caught up in the romance of the artistic vision and the work and thousands of hours of production that went into his Dune, with all of the storyboarding, all of the people he brought on, like Dan O'Bannon and Geiger, and like, it's insane to me that he produced that Dune storyboard book, sent it around, and I mean, I guess naturally no one wanted to make that movie.
Yeah.
But the book itself is a work of art.
Yeah.
I want to read that book. I don't want to watch the movie.
Well, and I think that was my takeaway, is that this was more it was less a documentary about the making of a movie as it was a documentary about the making of a book of storyboards.
Yeah.
As it was anything else. And that to me is equally fascinating, but it is like, to me, you know something is slightly off with these kind of movies when the movie doesn't get made, and I know I'm like the exception for, the cinephiles who watch this movie, but I was like, I think the money people made the right call, because Jodorowsky wasn't going to like be sensible at a certain point and go like, oh well, like I've already spent the budget and the budget was already high, so now we can just stop and do with what I've got. He was going to keep going and going and going and going and going until everybody involved was broke and bankrupt. And I'm not convinced that would have been worth it.
The one aspect of the documentary you're hitting on right there that I found questionable was the approach to the money.
Yeah.
Because it downplays how much the movie was going to cost. It sticks strictly to the line that Jodorowsky had in his head, which was completely unrealistic.
Yeah.
If you're going in saying, "Oh, the movie costs," it was it 35,000? I think. I mean, 35 million was what he had in his head. That was the number.
Yeah.
And you're looking,
which for the 70s was an astronomical number.
It was an astronomical number, but you're
especially
looking at
for like a Jodorowsky art film,
right? You're looking at the storyboards. You're looking at the people that he has on board to produce this film, to achieve his visual style. And the length that he had planned, which was something like 3 hours, 2.5, 3 hours, somewhere in that neighborhood. And that was after it was cut down to what they could tolerate. Because originally, wasn't it supposed to be 7 or 8? Like, I know I'm butchering numbers here.
Yeah, it was supposed to be an 8-hour movie.
Yeah. And $35 million can only go so far. Even in the 70s. Yeah. We're not talking about a 90-minute science fiction film with honestly, I can't even wrap my brain around how some of those effects were going to be achieved at that particular point in time. So if he's going into we'll fuck around and find out $35 million movie, you're exactly right in that it was going to bankrupt anybody that decided to foot that bill.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to side with the creative and the artists when they're going into these discussions with the big bad studios, and the big bad studio gatekeepers aren't letting him produce his vision.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the movie, when they're wrapping it up and you've come back to reality a little bit, you go, you know what? Those guys, that's why they were still in business in 1973 or 74 or what.
Yeah. Well, and also we also have the benefit of seeing what eventually happened with David Lynch, who managed to, there is the Alan Smithy version of that movie, but there's still you watch that movie and you don't go like, oh, this was a hack job. It's very much a David Lynch film, and it lost it lost a lot of money, especially because Dino De Laurentiis made it with this absurd idea that it was going to be his Star Wars. And
that's a collaboration that I just want to be in the room.
Yeah.
Having heard a lot of conversations about the Dino De Laurentiis filmmaking methodology coming into direct confrontation with David Lynch, I want to know what they talked about.
Yeah. Well, and you could argue that was the perfect example of what can happen when an auteur decides to work with a pure money guy, because the main you could say no matter what you think of Dune, without Dune, the Lynch fans would not have gotten Blue Velvet, because the reason why Blue Velvet got made was because it was part of Lynch's deal was if I do this movie for you, then you have to make the next movie that I want to make, and that's how Blue Velvet happened. And I think that's sort of to me that I think I would be more interested in a story about the full-on making of the actual first Dune that we got, than this theoretical Dune that resulted in a very pretty picture book. But who knows what the movie could have been. Whereas if they made a documentary about David Lynch's Dune, you have that sort of direct thing of like money versus art. And I think that would have been a bit more fascinating. But I think I think it's one of the only Lynch movies I own. I have the Blu-ray of the original cut. I don't have the Arrow cut, so I don't know if there's a long making of documentary on there. But to me, that if I had the choice and you told me there could only be one documentary about a Dune movie, I would go with that one over the one that didn't get made.
From our perspective, I think we want to know how the conversation, how the production ultimately resolves itself. We want to see the product, whether it's butchered or genius. Like we want to know where that story goes. And I don't particularly care for Lynch's Dune. But it's interesting as a failed movie.
And also you have the benefit, you can make, it would be, Jodorowsky's Dune is ultimately a pre-production history. Mm-hmm. Whereas a documentary about Lynch's Dune you could actually talk about how it got made, how it got started, and how it actually got made, and the end result. So you have a beginning, middle, and end. With Jodorowsky's Dune, you only have a beginning. You don't have a middle and end.
Maybe if we got that Lynch's Dune documentary, it would be like Jodorowsky's Dune 2, because there's no doubt in my mind, and I'm sure that Jodorowsky was right when he was talking about the way that imagery that he created influenced science fiction, with everybody having access to his storyboards. And at the end of Jodorowsky's Dune, they're pointing out the similarities in the science fiction that would come for the next 15, 20 years, and the way that reflects some of his creative imagery. So, but
also that's when you hire all of these people who will eventually become influential in sci-fi. It's not so much that it was all in this book. It was like Dan O'Bannon is going to write. Right. It's going to write Alien. They're going to hire Giger to do Alien. It's less than. It's like I'm not sure Jodorowsky deserves all the credit for that.
No. In the unrelated works, though, I think there's something to his claims that it proliferated through the industry a little bit more than the average, tanked production.
Yeah.
Stylistically, the documentary does a great job of telling a story and getting into sort of the nuts and bolts. There's the moment that I loved where the meeting between Dan O'Bannon and Jodorowsky becomes sort of a mushroom trip. Dan O'Bannon is seeing light come through Jodorowsky's eye sockets, and there's spirals. These are the details I want to know about these conversations. Yeah, Dan O'Bannon is going to have an acid trip, talking to Jodorowsky. They're just going to be tripping on whatever they've got and having a really deep conversation, probably much deeper in their minds. But that's the stuff that I really enjoyed about this documentary. And while it does...
and I'll just add that I think any documentary that has Dan O'Bannon in it before he passed away really benefits from having him in it, because he was just such a cranky guy that he just wasn't afraid to say anything.
Yeah.
So you really you never got the sense that he was holding anything back. He would just full on tell you exactly what he thought. So that's why I've loved every documentary I've ever saw that had Dan O'Bannon in it.
Jodorowsky's cult status has sort of significant place in my movie going past, in that when I was in high school, I ordered. Of course, this is how we got most of these movies at the time, was ordering bootlegs off of this brand new thing called the internet. Because now that we had internet sites that would sell us movies we couldn't find anywhere else, so a group of guys I knew, we all went in and bought a whole box of bootleg tapes from Revoc. It was a Canadian bootlegger that sent VHS tapes all over the place, and included in that box, I got El Topo because I had read about it, presumably in the Cult Films Guide. I don't know where else I would have read about it.
I think it says a lot that the first bootleg that I ever ordered off the internet was Russ Meyer's Super Vixens.
Yeah,
I think that's
definitely like the beginning of your cinephilia. So El Topo was one of the first ones, and one of the first exposures I had to truly cult cinema. And while it wasn't a movie that I don't know if I watched it more than twice in my life, I enjoy it for what it is and where it sits in my sort of expanding cinema education, but I've never loved Jodorowsky, and I think I finished Holy Mountain. I think.
Yeah, I think like with El Topo, I have the double because I'm not a huge fan of westerns to begin with. Mm-hmm. So a spiritual deconstruction of the spaghetti western. Really, like it's almost like how do you make Allan hate something he doesn't like even more?
True. So, and thinking along this line of he wanted to create Dune because he wanted to break cinema and expand minds and change lives through his movie. Has there ever been a movie that has expanded your mind, changed lives, or entirely shifted your cinematic perspective? Is such a thing possible? One single movie.
I think I'm too old at this point for that, because like honestly, and this is going to sound like a joke, but the first movie that actually came to mind was Barbie. Mm-hmm. Because Greta Gerwig is doing something like she's basically using like Godardian techniques in this toy commercial. Like she's making an art film, like $1 billion blockbuster art film, where the resolution occurs through like they speak politics and the politics cures everything. It's truly remarkable, and then I think the way like a lot of audiences are reacting to it at that level. I think in a way it is sort of, but sort of like the horror is that the way it's breaking cinema is that the lesson the studio people are going to maybe making isn't that this is a once in a lifetime movie where we gave full creative control and something amazing was produced. It's going to be, okay, let's get our top tier talent making toy commercials. And I think like that, in that way, it might actually break cinema because now we're going to get, Martin Scorsese's G.I. Joe.
We could take it all the way back to Orson Welles doing Transformers the movie.
Yeah.
And that was the first movie that I thought of in that they did something within the constraints of a toy commercial. Yeah. And that movie did some very different things with the animated feature directed at 8-year-olds in that it killed off the hero.
But it did that precisely so it could sell more toys.
Right.
It wasn't an artistic decision. It was purely a money-making decision of like, if we kill off all of the characters they know and introduce these new characters, they'll buy the toys of these new characters.
Which it's a bold strategy.
Yeah.
I will crush you with my bare hands. Die, Autobot! First, Prime. Then Ultra Magnus. And now, you. It's a pity you Autobots die so easily, or I might have a sense of satisfaction now. Arise, Miss Prime. Optimus. No.
Actually, in the time that it took for me to say that sentence, you healed.
Fantastic.
Nice.
Hey, Barbie.
Yeah.
Can I come to your house tonight?
Sure. I don't have anything big planned, just a giant blowout party with all the Barbies and planned choreography and a bespoke song. You should stop by.
So cool.
Yeah. Okay. Bye.
Okay, bye. Goodbye.
And maybe it's because that's the most recent movie I just had the theatrical experience with. But yeah, no, that's the first movie I'm thinking of that truly is doing something dynamic and different. And like some people are getting it, and some people are just going like, "Oh, that was cute," and just completely like the whole like dynamic of it just sort of like whooshing past their heads. But you know,
yeah, I couldn't come up with anything. I mean, there are movies that sort of give you a swift kick to the head when you're younger because you haven't seen enough to have a baseline. So when something that's different, that's bigger, that's something other than what you've seen comes along, and it redirects your attentions. And along those lines, I could say, oh, Delamorte sort of broke me at a certain point because I was unexposed to the Eurotrash art cinema. And that sent me down an entirely different plane of investigation and finding out where that movie came from. Because at the time, I had just walked into a theater because I heard there was an Italian zombie movie. And holy shit, if that's an Italian zombie movie, what else can I find?
Yeah.
So beyond that, like that is probably the purest example of the outrageous or the unseen coming into your life and redirecting your perspective and the way you want to watch movies. But no, I've never been broken by cinema.
Yeah. Chances are, if a movie tries to break cinema for me, I'll just stop watching that movie.
Yeah. Because
I don't want cinema broken. I like cinema, to remain intact.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there have been bad movies that sort of... I can think of the year that I was low man on the totem pole reviewing movies for a tabloid magazine, and I was given the movies that the editor and the second writer didn't want. So I was doing Slackers and Ballistic X versus Sever. Anything like that was all I was writing about. So after a steady stream of that, I wanted to stop going to see movies because the only thing that happened there was pain.
That feels like a good place to end.
Yeah. You got a Blu-ray this time.
Woohoo, finally. Broke my streak.
You ready for those Blu-rays?
Oh my.
We'll see. We'll see. I'm not sure what I do have a bunch of Blu-rays I haven't watched, so I feel like there has to be an O in there. If not, you're going to be picking it for me.
I'm excited about that. Rigged.
Your streak is longer than mine because you've had nothing but
more.
Oh no, you had DVD last time. Yeah.
A Blu-ray from the letter T, which shouldn't be too hard to find.
Oh yeah, T would be easy for me, but I'll have to check on it.
All right, and that caps things off for this Cinema Shelfie episode.